Sales Live. I'm your host, Joe Beck, founder of the Sales Activist and host of the Impact Sales podcast. Impact Sales Live was created to shine a spotlight on the best practices and tips that will help you stand out from the crowd in regard to sales. Whether you are an entrepreneur, a coach, a consultant, or a sales professional selling for a company, you'll get a lot of value from Impact Sales Live. I'll be hosting Impact Sales Live every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern. So block off your calendar and make sure you start off your week the right way right here. Impact Sales Live today is sponsored by our premier sponsor, Podcast EZ. Podcast EZ is your go-to source for all things podcasting. You just speak and their team will take care of the rest. We used Podcast EZ to help us create and launch the Impact Sales podcast, and we are completely thrilled with the results. To learn more about Podcast EZ, just follow along here today during Impact Sales Live, and I'll be dropping their link in the chat. So let's kick off things today with a quick explanation about Impact Sales Live. You never know what might happen here or who will be on. Plan on seeing some guests coming up in future weeks involving sharing some success stories and wins along the way in sales. And most importantly, we're going to make sure you get a lot of valuable insights and information that can help put into action in your business. So today, I'd like to just kick things off and start with our topic, which is going to be your perfect sales process as an entrepreneur. So, there's a lot of different things that we talk about here in Impact Sales Live. And actually today we got the background music going on a little bit today in the broadcast. And, I wanted to start this session, basically because I think there's a lot of people out there that struggle with the sales process. And, the funny thing is it's not extremely difficult to get knocked off of track when you're trying to go through a very specific and methodical sales process with a prospect. There's just a lot of curveballs that can be thrown at you. So before we get into that, I want to take a quick step back and talk about what I believe are the two biggest things that hold back people from just big sales success, the things that really hold people back. And I'm going to narrow it down to two general categories, okay? And we're not going to say that these are the only things, but we're going to say that these are the two biggest categories that impact people's sales success. And the first one is not what we're going to talk about today, but it's the starting point. And that is this. Number one on the list is people don't have a scalable and repeatable or duplicatable client acquisition system. Now, we're not going to be talking about that today during this live, but I wanted to highlight this as the starting point because it kind of leads into the process. What happens when people struggle in sales? And I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of people with sales challenges and obstacles. And a lot of times it starts with number one, which is they don't have a duplicatable and scalable client acquisition system. They do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. They try to acquire prospects and clients a lot of different ways. And it's just not scalable. It's not something that they can really ramp up or throw gasoline on and take it to the next level. And as a result, they kind of get held in neutral or stuck in gear. They don't get to really get going with their sales effort. That's the first thing. But that's not the topic of what we're really going to dive into today. Today, we're going to talk about your perfect sales process. Now, before we get into that, I want to tell you what number two on the list is of things that hold people back. And it's having a bulletproof, easy to follow sales process. A bulletproof, easy to follow sales process. Now, why is that so important? And why does having the perfect sales process make all the difference in the world for you? Now, this is not going to be a technical conversation. This is going to be a conversation related to the general categories of a successful sales process. And more importantly, how you can simply and easily get back on track when you're knocked off track. Because the fact is, for a lot of people, entrepreneurs, coaches, consultants, or anybody that's selling, sometimes they get knocked off track. They lose the rhythm that they have in their sales process. The prospect takes over a little bit and starts steering, or something just knocks them off track. And as a result, they lose momentum in their sales process. And sometimes it's because, number one, they don't have a clearly defined, easy to follow sales process. Sometimes it's not what I call bulletproof. There's certain gaps or holes in the process, and it creates an opportunity for people to miss the opportunity to move forward in the sales process. So prospects are lost, opportunities are lost, and ultimately money is lost. So today's going to be all about your perfect sales process. And I think the most important thing that you can do when identifying your perfect sales process is not the details related to specifically what you offer or how you offer it, but it's to define in clear categories what the important steps of the process are, because the wheel can come off of it at any time. You could have a mistake or an error in any step of the process that completely messes you up. So let's break this down and talk about your perfect sales process. Now, one of the things that I've had the great opportunity to do over the years, 30 plus years in sales, is to work with a lot of different people in sales environments, a lot of sales teams, a lot of individuals, a lot of top producers, ton of entrepreneurs. And when I talk about sales process, I've found that sometimes people make things much more complicated than it needs to be. It makes people a little crazy sometimes that they create these massive, ginormous flow charts to their processes. It's kind of like an engineer's mind on steroids at the sales process level. And the fact is, it doesn't have to be like that. No matter what you sell, no matter what you're offering to the world, you can keep it simple and build some true momentum. And the reason why that's so important is the more complicated the process, and I want you to write this down, the more complicated the process, the easier it is for something to knock you off track. The more steps in the process, the easier it is for something to change your momentum or take you down the wrong path. The more, chains or links in the chain that could break, the easier it is for the chain to be broken and something to go wrong. So I'm a big advocate of keeping things as simple as possible, keeping things very focused around something that's easy for you to follow and get back to if you get knocked off track. Look, no matter how much you may want to deny it, we're not always in charge of what goes on in this process. Sometimes prospects throw curveballs at us. Sometimes parts of the process have to change or adapt or be adjusted because of new information, new decision makers, new players in the game. All of these things can play a role. But the reason why it's so important to have a perfect and, more importantly, a bulletproof, easy to follow sales process is, if you already know you have other elements of the process that are outside of your control, the best thing that you can do for yourself and your sales success is to keep your side of the house as simple and as easy to follow as possible. And I had a great opportunity earlier, actually last week, towards the tail end of the week, to speak at an in-person networking event. And we talked about sales process. And I did portions of what I'm going to talk about today, literally discussing how you can specifically, I see your note, Sharon, I'll make sure we get you that link, seeing your specific perfect sales process. And we got into it. It was a brief talk specifically about trying to keep it as simple as possible. And I like to believe in training environments, especially, that the number one thing that you have to do is keep it as simple and easy to remember as possible, because there's a lot of things that goes on in somebody's mind, in the back of their head, about what's going on with their sales process. So you want to keep it as simple as possible. So the perfect sales process for anybody is something that they can go back to and defer to in a moment's notice if something changes. If they get knocked off track and they get brought back to it, where were they? How simple the process is can truly dictate how successful you can be, because it allows you to get back in step, back in rhythm with exactly where you were previously to getting knocked off track. So I like to keep things simple in training environments. And the methodology that I have used many times over the years and trained many teams with, and I still believe this is a simple methodology to follow, is what I call the 5V methodology. Okay. The 5V methodology. And the V's aren't 5 different words that start with V. Somebody, said, I don't even know 5 different words that start with V, but no, it's what I call the 5 vowels. Okay. You guys all remember back in school when you're a student, right? We talk about the 5 vowels in the English language, right? A, E, I, O, and U. Sometimes Y and W. We'll get to that later, but A, E, I, O, and U. And the reason why this methodology has been very successful in training people is you only have to remember where you are in that little wordplay, A, E, I, O, U, to know exactly where you are in the sales process. So I'm going to help you all by making your sales process a perfect, easy to follow, bulletproof sales process by placing in there the A, E, I, O, U, the vowels, to keep it easy for you to follow. So let's start with what they are. So number one, A. A stands for attract. At some point in your sales process, you want to attract people to you. Now, this is kind of a transitional step from whatever you may be using as your client acquisition system, or whatever marketing you might be using, or whatever steps may lead a prospect to you. But it's not something that is part of just that first process. It is a part of the sales process, because at some point when you engage the prospect, and we're going to talk about engage next, at some point when you engage that prospect, you have to attract them to you. There needs to be something about who you are and what you're offering and the impact it's going to have. There needs to be some degree of attraction from your prospect to you. And I encourage you in every step of the process that you follow as far as your sales process, that you keep the 5 vowels in mind and start with attract. If you don't attract people to you, and I'm not talking about having a separate system that does it, I'm talking about in the sales process, if you aren't drawing people to you throughout the conversation, throughout the interaction, throughout the way you work with them, you are making it harder than it needs to be successful in selling. Because one of the things that I think everybody has heard, and I've talked about it many times, and it's so true, people tend to work with people they know, like, and trust. Well, across the board there, know, like, and trust, they are all attraction tools. Somebody has to know you a little bit. They have to like you and trust you. Well, you are attracting them to you, whether it's in what you do or how you do it, or how you handle yourself, or how you respond to their questions, or the way that you phrase things, the patience you show. You are attracting them to you. And if you don't do that, if you are cold and stoic and you don't attract them to you, you don't encourage them to pay attention or listen to what else that you're going to be offering them. If there's no degree of attraction, it's very impersonal, it's cold, and they are disconnected from you. And you need to tap into the ability of being able to attract people to you in the way you communicate and the way you handle your sales process. And we start there because in many instances with people, they struggle right out of the gate because there's this awkward tension at the beginning of the sales process. And maybe some of you know what I'm talking about. Maybe this has happened to you or with you. Maybe you've been a part of those conversations. There's just this uncomfortable feeling or vibe about the conversation. It's not comfortable or easy. You're not attracting anybody to you. Maybe you've been on the other side of that equation and you're listening to somebody and you're just not buying into what they're saying. And it might even be before you even hear any of the details about what it is that they offer and what it could do for you. There's something about that person, that communication, whether it's the pattern, the way they speak, whatever it is, that just turns you off. There's no attraction. It's not drawing you in. So the A in the 5V methodology is you have to attract people. That's the first step in an easy to follow bulletproof sales process. If you aren't drawing people in every step of the way, drawing them closer to you, attracting them, if you aren't doing that, you're setting yourself up for a harder process. So I start with A because I think attraction is important throughout the process. You're drawing them into you, to your solution, to the product or service that you're offering. You're pulling them close to you through the interaction, through the sales process. So that's the A. Next is the E, A-E, right? The E stands for engage, okay? In any sales process, there needs to be a high degree of engagement. You need to engage your prospect. You need to communicate clearly and engage them and remain engaged with them throughout the entire process, whether it is in your eye contact, whether it's in the way you are listening to them actively and acknowledging what they're saying and absorbing it all. There needs to be solid engagement. Okay. And that is both active and passive. That is things such as, the communication going on between the two of you, whether it's in person or remotely. Engagement is an ongoing thing. It doesn't stop. You don't just put it aside when the appointment's over. Engagement is an ongoing thing, and it's part of your sales process. If you have a great conversation with somebody, but then you drop the ball and you don't follow up and you don't engage and you don't get them the answers to the questions that they had, or get them something that they asked you to send them as far as a follow-up, right? Then you have failed to engage adequately. Okay. Right away out of the gate. Like, think about it as we're going along. You have to attract them and draw them in. You have to engage them. You have to keep them engaged in the process, on point, discussing what you're going to be able to show them, do for them, provide for them. And if you don't do those two things and you don't continue to do those things through the sales process, it can be very easy for you to lose momentum in the process. Now, this is right about the time that we really need to talk about curveballs and things that can take you off track. There isn't a person out there who hasn't been on a call, an appointment, a sales interaction, that something hasn't gone awry or gone off track, right? Happens all the time. Could happen in the attraction phase. It could happen in the engagement phase. So I want you to keep this in mind, and why the A, E, I, O, and U is so powerful and easy to remember is all you have to remember is what stage of the process you were truly in, and go back and look at the previous steps to know, have you done enough to jump right back in to where you were? And I'll give you an example. Let's say you're at, E, an engagement, and the prospect goes cold. They start ghosting you, right? They just stop returning calls, or they just are ignoring what you're saying. Well, somewhere in there was a breakdown in either the attraction portion or the engagement portion, right? And you need to figure out what went wrong and potentially fix it. And if you don't know for sure, your only option, your only choice is to go back to the place where you felt you were most previously still on track. So let's say you're in the engagement phase and things seemed really great at the beginning when you were just drawing them in and attracting them and you were talking, everything was good there. Well, your default position would be to go back to that attraction phase, kind of warm them up again, and then get back into the engagement. Doesn't matter where you are in the process. You could be at the beginning or towards the end. Your default should always be go back to the last place you know confidently that you were in the right place, that you were still have momentum, that things were going as planned. If somewhere along the way you aren't sure of what that is, your only option is to kind of start over as best as you can and move through the stages again. Now, they don't have to take as long. You don't have to start all the way over. You could jumpstart things by warming up those conversations again, but you need to have something that's easy to follow to go back to. A lot of times I'll get phone calls from people selling, entrepreneurs, coaches, consultants, and they'll reach out and they'll say, hey, here's where I'm losing people. And we'll walk through certain steps and I'll recognize a gap. And that gap might be something that happens consistently on a very particular type of a conversation, right? And it's easy to identify in the sales process what part needs to be addressed. But it doesn't always work like that. Sometimes you don't have the information. You just don't know. And unless somebody shares with you, you can only go off of your side of the experience, what you think is the case, and then go back to where you know that things were still working well. Okay. So let's get back on track to where we were. After A for attract and E for engage, right? The next one is I. And I is one of my favorite letters, and it absolutely is one of my favorite letters in this acronym because the I stands for impact. We talk about impact a lot with the Sales Activist. We talked about impact on our podcast, the Impact Sales Podcast. We talk about it here on Impact Sales Live. Why is impact so important? Well, it's because right there is where the rubber hits the road. Right there is where you are going to emotionally, truly emotionally connect with your prospect through the product, service, or offering that you're giving them. Impact is where you start to form an emotional connection to knowing what you can offer your prospect and what they need and what it would do for them, right? It's different than value. Value is, here's what you pay, here's what you get. It's pretty straightforward, right? We're talking about impact. We're talking about how deep emotionally you take the conversation. This, in my opinion, is where the majority of sales processes fall apart. Now, notice nowhere in A, E, or I so far have we actually gotten into providing a solution to the prospect. We haven't even gotten there yet. Things get off track in the sales interaction for different reasons at different times, and a lot of them fall apart in the impact phase. Now, why is that? And I've talked about this in other lives and podcasts. And if you spend any kind of time following me online or talking to me one-on-one, you're going to hear me talking about this. But things fall apart in impact simply because people don't go far enough. There's a line in every conversation that people tend to work up towards, and it's typically the line where they feel confident enough that a prospect may decide to move forward and work with them. And the problem is, many times that line is too subjective and geared towards the individual person's belief that what they're offering is powerful enough for that person to make a decision, but it's not geared towards the prospect's perspective. And why is that so powerful to understand? It's because if you don't emotionally get your prospect close to the same place you are in the belief that your offering is going to have a true impact, if you don't get them close to that, they may not feel the same urgency that you do. They may not see it. It may not click. All the I's aren't dotted and the T's aren't crossed. There's something that's going to hold them back. Now, remember I said that this is before you even get into what you do and how you do it, right? It's about painting a picture. It's about laying a foundation for people to understand what they're going to get and the impact that it's going to have on their life, their business, themselves personally. And this goes before the actual product or the actual solution. And, we'll get into what the O stands for. It happens before that. And the reason is, if you powerfully control the sales process through A for attract and E for engage and I for impact, if you powerfully control things right up until that point, you are going to be running downhill on a roller coaster of success. Things are going to start picking up speed. But if you don't, if you fall short in those first three, if you trip up, if you fall out of line, if it's just not as strong as it should be, it's harder. It's like an uphill climb on a roller coaster. It's harder and harder. You're not building up any speed. So impact is critical, and how you get into impact, and then we're going to talk about this in your sales process specifically, is you need to ask really direct, pointed questions of your prospect in the sales process about what impact things will have on them. If it's a financial thing, how much will they receive and what would they do with the money? If it's an emotional thing, what relief or comfort or good feeling would they receive, and how would their life look different feeling that way? If it's a time thing and they get back time in their schedule, what would they do with the time? If it was something related to their business life and security, get them talking and get them describing it. Now, this is right in the middle of your sales process. And I've talked about this before on other lives. And if you've not caught any of them, I would encourage you to check out the Sales Activist YouTube channel. All of our lives are listed there. You can check them out. But it is so powerful to talk about the impact that your offering has on somebody and do it in detail, even before you specifically outline it. Because look, the fact is, you know what you're going to offer them. You know what your solutions are, your products are. You know the tremendous value that you bring, and you know the impact that you can have on them. It's not about you knowing it. It's about you taking them on an emotional journey to realize the impact for themselves. And too many times people they want to skip through the impact phase. They don't want to get deep into it. They want to just do it on the periphery and mention it or reference it, kind of like they just want to tick the box, but they don't want to really dig into it and really get the most out of it. And I'm going to tell you, that's a big mistake. That's a mistake that a lot of people make. A lot of entrepreneurs make it. Get to know people, dig in deep, understand the emotions behind how they make their decision and what it would mean, because it makes it that much easier later on when you're trying to truly position yourself with the solution that you have. See, if you do a great job of walking them through impact in your sales process and getting them to talk about specifically what the impact would mean to them, what it would mean to them. I'll give you an example. If your product or service or offering gives back time in somebody's schedule, ask them what they would do with the time and let them tell you as much detail as they can what that time would mean to them. Because when your solution comes up in just a little bit in the sales process, they've already start to mentally paint a picture of what it would be like having that time. And it doesn't matter. Insert whatever you deliver in the blank there, whether it's time or money or freedom or peace of mind, whatever it is, insert that in the open space and spend as much time referencing it. And even more importantly, spend even more time getting them to talk about it. Because the more they talk about it, the more they express to you the importance of that time, the impact that time has on them, what it would mean to them, what it would mean to their family, their children, however they define it. The more they tell you about it, the more they emotionally express to you what those things would mean to them, the easier it becomes for them to see eye to eye with you when you start proposing a solution. Because in their mind, they've started the process of thinking about it. They've already verbalized it. It's literally just a few steps away from becoming a reality. And there you are, well positioned to be able to talk about specifically what your solution can do in the deliverance of that reality. See, for everybody, we all have our own goals, dreams, and aspirations, right? And if the people that are talking to you seem aligned, truly aligned with the deliverance of your goals, dreams, and aspirations, well, that's the person you want to be working with. That's the person you know, like, and trust. That's the person that becomes a trusted advisor because they cared enough to ask those questions. They cared enough to deliver that impact. But if you don't dig that deep, if you don't uncover that in your conversations, you're going to find that you're going to miss those opportunities. And this is a great chance for me just to once again thank our premier sponsor, Podcast Easy. Rena McGill and her team at Podcast Easy have been just amazing to work with. Right on our YouTube channel, I encourage you to go and subscribe to the Sales Activist YouTube channel. You can not only catch Impact Sales Live there, but you can also catch the video versions of all of our Impact Sales podcast episodes, as well as downloading them on 38 different podcast channels. Wherever you get your podcasts, if you just search Impact Sales Podcast, you're going to see my face come up. I suggest you download some episodes, get into what we're talking about. You're going to see me interviewing sales thought leaders and top producers. You're going to see me talking about things that will impact your sales success. All of that happened as a result of the great support and help that I received from Podcast Easy. If you're at all considering starting a podcast, jump on the link that I just shared. Make sure that you connect with the people at Podcast Easy. If you want to get my input on that whole experience, reach out to me. You could just text me at the using the word sales, text sales to 321-421-5213. Connect with all my social media. Be happy to connect with you and tell you all about the experience of working with Podcast Easy. So let's jump back to the sales process. See, just as simple as you get knocked off track in a sales conversation, it can happen here as well. So now that you've attracted somebody, you've truly attracted them into your sales process and kept them there. You've engaged them the right way. The engagement continues during the conversations, during the calls, after the calls, follow-ups. Engagement is right, okay? You're impacting them. You're impacting them by going through the true impact of the things that are important to them. Notice I did not say that it only is you steering that. It's them. It's your prospect steering that. What's important to them? How can your product, service, or offering absolutely deliver that for them? You're going to explore that by getting them talking. That's the difference. So let's go on to the next step. We've covered A, E, and I. So the next one, the O, in the sales process, in what I consider a bulletproof, easy to follow sales process. You can't forget A, E, I, O, and U, right? The O stands for your offer. Now, your offer in how you address getting them the things that they've highlighted in the impact part of the sales process, your offer is critical. How you offer things, how you position your product, service, or offering is powerful. Okay. There's obviously a lot of different ways that you can position what you bring, but your offer, the offer stage of the sales process is critical. And the reason it is because this is the point where you finally truly get to express all the amazing things that you can do. I know for some of you, I know I was like this early in my career. I know some of you as entrepreneurs, coaches, and consultants are like this right now. You're like bulls in a china shop. You want to talk about all the great things that you can do because you can, right? Because you can impact people's lives. You can have a tremendous impact on people's lives and businesses and their income. And, you do amazing work. And everybody wants to get out there and they want to talk about that. But guess what? That isn't as important as getting your prospect talking about it. You being excited about it isn't as critical as getting them excited about it. And how do you get them excited about it? Simple. We talked about that when we talked about impact. It has to be about them. See, the fact is, we talked about this before as well on previous lives. Nobody cares specifically what you do. What they care about is the impact that what you can do has on them. And I want you to absorb that because, I'm not trying to take the wind out of anybody's sails. I remind myself of this every day. See, nobody cares. The fact is, and I'm not saying people don't care because they're insensitive. I'm saying they don't care because people are naturally wired to think and receive things and think personally how they may impact them, what they think of it, what they may do with it, what it might mean to them, right? But nowhere in there, honestly, are they concerned with the specifics about you and what you do. Now, they will walk through that process with you and they will mean it. They're sincere about that. But ultimately, their driving motivation is not going to be about you. They're not going to say, well, yeah, I don't need that, but I'm going to buy it from you because it's you. That's not going to happen unless they're a friend or a family member that's doing it just to help take care of you. It doesn't happen that way. The fact is, you have to make sure that it is all about them. It is all about them. It's the old, it's not me, it's you. Well, in this case, in the sales process, in sales environments and sales interactions, that's absolutely true. It's not me. It's all about you, right? You got to make sure it's all about the other person. So when it comes to your offer needs to be aligned, perfectly aligned with what your prospect said was important to them, what they talked about, what they explored, what they shared with you in the impact phase. Your offer needs to be aligned with that. Now, it doesn't have to be perfectly aligned. Let me make sure I clarify that for everybody. If you offer something that doesn't necessarily address the whole concern or need that your prospect have, it doesn't mean that your offering is not valuable. It just means that it may only address a portion of the need, which is perfectly fine. People may find the solutions that they need from a couple of different places, working together to get them the totality of what they need. But there needs to be some degree of alignment. It needs to at least address a portion of what was covered in the impact phase. See, another thing that a lot of people have brought to me over the years as a sales coach and trainer is what we call disjointed sales processes, where the salesperson is talking one language and the prospect is talking another language. It's just broken. It's disjointed. There's no consistency in what they're talking about. The prospect is looking for one thing, and the professional that's providing the product or service or offering is focused on something entirely different. It's disjointed. And see, when you have a sales process that's like that, you have to go back to what I mentioned earlier. You have to step back and find the last place that you were still on track. If you were struggling to do that, I would certainly love to help you. You could just text the word sales to the number 321-421-5213. We can schedule a complimentary consultation. I'll talk with y'all about sales and the AEIOU process. But I'm going to tell you, it's critical to your success that you don't allow your sales process to become disjointed. If you do great work getting somebody to talk about the impact that what you do could offer, and then you offer something that just doesn't align with where they are, it's not going to help your success. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't alter your offer a little bit. And here's one of the prime examples of the majority of where I see broken sales processes. Imagine if the O was before the I, right? If the O was before the I, if you were pressed to talk about your offer without knowing anything that mattered to your prospect, what was important to them, what would make them sleep better at night, you didn't know anything about their concerns in their business, you just were backwards. Do you think you're going to have a lot of success in that environment where you're under the gun, you're under the microscope, and you have to show them something that you just hope with blind faith has an impact on them? No. You'll definitely have much weaker results if you're pressed into talking about your offer before getting into what things really mean to your prospect. See, and it can be called different things in different definitions of a sales process. Some people call it discovery phase, where they're digging into really understanding what matters, and you go deep in understanding that. But I think sometimes discovery gets confused with just getting the facts and the data. Like, who are the owners? What's their decision-making process? What were their sales last year? Like, you could put together a whole list of items that you need to find out to do business. But that doesn't mean it means something to your prospect. I'm talking about the impact that has meaning. So your offer, going back to the O, your offer has to come after you understand the impact, after you understand what it is that means the most to your prospect. If your prospect is going to share with you the things that mean the most to them, let's say your prospect says, man, I wish I had 8 hours back in my week. Like there's a list of things that are priorities for me that I just can't get to because I just got too many other things on my plate. And you've got an offer that gives them back that kind of time. Well, that's a powerful position to be in, right? You're in a great position. You're in a position to be able to show them that your offering can get them their 8 hours. The 8 hours, by the way, that they just previously talked about, that would mean a lot to them. It had true personal meaning, whatever it is that they would do with it. So I want you to keep that in mind, why the AEIO is so powerful, because when you follow these things in step, keeping it simple, keeping it easy to follow and literally bulletproof, it's really easy to get knocked off and get right back into it and not lose any momentum. Now, I'm not saying it's perfect. Nothing is perfect, right? There are situations and things that you can't control. But as it relates to the things that you can control, how you control the sales process, it is easy to follow, and it is bulletproof when you follow it that way. Now, it's not the only process out there. You could do a lot of things a different way. Your offering may require a slightly different process, but I encourage you, as one professional to another, as one top producing salesperson to other sales producers, that you go out there and take that sales process and make it as simple as you can make it. Drill down, make it as simple as you can, because I will tell you, the more complicated it is, the easier it is for something to go wrong. So your offer needs to be aligned with specifically what your prospect has already shared with you meant so much to them. Why is the order of the sales process so critical? Because if you're really paying attention to what your prospects are saying, and you already know what you can do, what your functional capabilities are, and you already know the things that you can accomplish for your prospect, and you allow them the latitude to describe to you what things mean to them, and then you encourage them at certain points of the process to dig deeper, to share more, to expand on it, and they tell you all these great things. They've told you everything that you need to know. They've shared with you what meant the most to them. Now, why is that so important? I'll tell you why. Not only does it put your prospect in the right emotional frame of mind to make a buying decision, but you have positioned yourself quite effectively as a trusted advisor to that person. Now, somebody would say, how is that possible just in a simple interaction? I'll tell you why, and I've covered this before as well. It's because the majority of people out there just don't dig into truly how emotional, impact-driven things mean to the prospect. They just don't dig into it. And the reason why that's powerful to understand is because when you run into a competitive situation and you are being compared to somebody else who maybe they had their sales process backwards. Maybe they had their O instead of the I for impact, right? And maybe they talked all about their product and they didn't form a great bond or relationship. They didn't listen to their prospect. They didn't really understand emotionally what was driving that person. And then they compare that person's interaction with the client to yours. Well, that prospect is going to immediately realize, well, wow, they asked me a lot different questions. They cared to ask about those questions. They dig deeper. They wanted to understand that more. See, one of the things that sales professional in general struggle with, and it doesn't matter whether you're a coach, consultant, entrepreneur, or you sell for a company, makes no difference. You know, a lot of recent studies have shown that sales professionals in general aren't memorable. They don't stand out. In fact, a couple of the guests that I had recently on the Impact Sales podcast mentioned specifically that sales professionals aren't memorable. They don't stand out. Well, why don't they stand out? I'll tell you, it's because they allowed their sales process to become disjointed and they didn't focus on impact. So that I is so powerful. Your offer in the O section, your offer just simply needs to align with the things that your prospect said was so important to them in the impact phase. Now, obviously, these are all generalities. This is not product specific or offering specific, but it really doesn't matter. Insert your product, your solution, your offering in the equation and ask questions of your prospect that help you identify their impact and then match your offering with what they need. You don't need to be an expert in sales to be highly effective in sales if you can master this process. I've had the great opportunity to work with some amazing sales producers, multi-million-dollar sales producers in different industries that I've worked with and coached. And one of the things that I've noticed about them is that they very comfortably recognize when it's time to let that prospect just talk and explain things, because they're gathering data that becomes vital to them later. It helps them stand out from everybody else. It helps them close at a higher ratio. And it even protects that business if later on your prospect changes his mind or a competitor comes in and starts to look at that client. See, the fact is, those conversations are things that are memorable. You know, there's been many conversations that I would have with prospects where I'd say to them, I don't know if the other people that you're talking to have asked you specifically about X or Y or Z, but I know when you explained to me that it was important that you get back 8 hours of your time each week, I took that to heart. And when I made this recommendation in the offer, it was because I had that top of mind from our conversation. See, there's alignment there. And a lot of people struggle with that. They struggle because they don't want to give their prospect enough time in the impact phase to tell them what they need to know. If you can keep your mouth shut and ask good questions and listen and truly understand what your prospect is sharing with you, you'll have everything you need to know and understand in the offer phase. Now, at some point in the offer phase, you're going to ask them to move forward with you. And that's part of the offer process as well. The asking for the business, the close, it's all in the offer. It starts with how you position it and it wraps up with how you close it up. That's all part of the process. But it's important that clearly you master that part of the process as well. And I want to go back to A, E, I, O, and U. If you trip on A, you trip on E, and you trip on I, your likelihood for success is very, very low. But if you master those steps and you get to your offer, you would have been told everything you needed to know. You positioned yourself as somebody that's, that they know, like, and trust. You positioned yourself as a trusted advisor because you've asked these questions. You've cared a little bit. Now, keep in mind, that's not a time thing. It's not about, I need to work with somebody for 6 months or a year or 10 years to become a trusted advisor. You could do that quickly. You could offer up 2 sentences and a couple of well-placed questions and earn the right to be an advisor to them. It comes from listening to understand and really knowing what to say and when to say it. Okay, so we've covered A, we've covered E, we've covered I, and we've covered O. What's left? U. Now, the U in the easy to follow bulletproof sales process stands for understanding. Okay. In every sales process, there needs to be a culmination and understanding of what happens next. And it doesn't matter whether it's a successful sales process or an unsuccessful sales process. I have seen people be wildly successful because they've mastered the A, E, I, O, and U. Even when they didn't win the business, it led them to greater things because they mastered enough of it that they got a lot of other value. They got referrals. They got the opportunity to come back and follow up or meet the next level in the decision-making chain, whatever it was. But the U for understanding is powerful. A lot of sales processes get left open-ended. People forget to follow up. They don't follow up when they're given a time frame to follow up, or they don't try to move along the process. See, the understanding phase is critical in a sales process because not only does it help position what the next steps are going to be, but it also helps you decide where you need to kind of call an audible and do something different. Okay. And I'll give you a quick example of that. You may go through the entire sales process and not win the business. And the prospect says, I'm not quite ready. I need 30 days or 45 days. And the understanding is that you're in a holding pattern until the next step. Well, understanding that, truly understanding that and mastering that part of the process will tell you what you need to do next. What your follow-up scheme should look like, when you should reach out to them, what the timing of it is, how you could position it differently to get them to take action now, create some sense of urgency. It all falls under understanding. Now, it doesn't mean that it's outside the sales process. It's the final stage of it, and anything can happen. It's like a wild card of the sales process. The understanding phase is what happens next. All roads lead through understanding. You could have to go back to the beginning. You could have to reach out to somebody else. You could come back in 30 days and win the business. You could come back tomorrow and win the business. It's all part of the understanding phase. And knowing when and how to do things in the understanding phase is crucial to your success. It could be simply taking a step back and reinforcing a few things and then maybe asking again to win the business. But really, the trick to the understanding phase is recognizing when you're in it. when you need to make a different decision, when you need to think differently, go in another direction, try something different, the understanding phase. And the understanding phase may result in you doing nothing. It may. Or it could result in you going in a lot of different directions. It could result in you following up with the prospect differently. One of the things that's critical in each one of these stages is that this is a joint effort between you and your prospect. This is a process of what I call guided discovery. This is not just you steering exclusively. This is you kind of with a co-pilot who is your prospect, agreeing as you go through these steps together. Okay? Turn right. Yeah, we're going to turn right. Turn left. Yeah, we're going to turn left. You've got to have the agreement as you go along. It doesn't matter what stage of the process you're in. It all comes together in the understanding phase. And the understanding phase may be that you need to take a step back because something was missed. But it's important that you recognize this stage. When I would spend time looking at the sales pipelines of sales professionals, I did this both in the corporate world and I've done this in the entrepreneur space quite a bit as well. And we would talk about what happened with certain prospects. You'd be amazed how many times the understanding phase was underutilized. Things were just hanging. They were just left there. I would say, well, what's next? How did you leave it with the prospect? Oh, I don't know. The call ended and, they weren't ready to make a decision and I'm not quite sure what's next. That's why the understanding phase is so important. It doesn't matter whether it's a no-go and nothing's happening next. It doesn't matter if the next step is this or that, or it's another direction or a restart or a step back. It makes no difference what the decision is in the understanding phase. But this part of the sales process is critical because this is not the place where things land and stay. The reason why I like this methodology for following the sales process is it forces action. The understanding phase forces action. Whatever it is, it forces you to do something. Even if the thing that requires you to do is to step away and move that prospect out of your pipeline because it's dead. Nothing's going to happen. You still have to do something. Nothing should ever stay in the understanding phase very long. It should be there. There should be an understanding of where it is, and it should be moved to whatever the next step is. And the next step may be that you sign them as a client and you step back. It may be that you have to push them out of your pipeline because they're not ready, or it may be something entirely different. But at the end of the process, a bulletproof, easy to follow process like the 5 V's, 5 vowels, you're going to at least have an understanding of what the next steps are. Don't be like the entrepreneur or the coach or consultant who's out there selling that leaves things in limbo, that leaves them just hang there. Quite honestly, one of the things that I've shared with people many, many times, is the methodology that I have that, yes is preferred. I'd love to work with you. No is acceptable. I can accept a no. Maybes just don't help anybody. They spend my time. They spend the other person's time. They aren't productive. And that's so powerful to keep in the back of your mind because of the understanding phase. When you're in the understanding phase of the sales process, it's critical for you to know that something has to happen. You have to move something out of that phase. It should never rest there. When I'm describing this with prospects and clients, and when I'm talking to people about the sales process, and I notice an abundance of prospects in what I would consider to be the understanding phase, I know there's usually a problem. How? Because they either would have said yes by now, or they would have said no by now, or they'd be somewhere else in the process. If they're just kind of in limbo, that means somebody hasn't done something with it. Somebody needs to take action. So the understanding phase is critical because not only does it continue to fuel your process, but it saves you the time and energy. See, one of the reasons why the understanding phase is critical is because nothing stays there, and it forces you to look at a pipeline realistically and not lie to yourself. that you have more opportunities going on than you really think you do. If you look at your pipeline and you realize, oh, everything I have is, I've gone through all these steps and here it is, and nothing's moved or changed or whatever, you got to do something with those things. They need to move and something needs to change. It might require a jump start. It might require you taking them out completely. The bottom line is this: you need to take ownership of the understanding phase. So A, E, I, O, and U, the 5V method for your perfect sales process as an entrepreneur. I know it's a simplification. It's simplified intentionally. It's a bulletproof, easy to follow sales process that anybody can follow, get knocked off track, go right back to, and get on track again with this sale. If you're struggling with sales in your business, I would like to help. If you have a disjointed sales process, if you have a client acquisition system that's not acquiring clients for you and you need help to get the sales process started, reach out to me. You can connect with me by texting the word sales to the number 321-421-5213. Got some new updates on my own personal client acquisition system coming your way soon. Don't miss the opportunity to get the help that you need. If you're struggling with sales, I'd like to help. This is Joe Beck with the Sales Activist. I'd like to thank one more time our premier sponsor, Podcast Easy. If you're interested in getting set up with a podcast and get yourself on 38 different podcast platforms, connect with Podcast Easy. Tell them the Sales Activist sent you. This is Joe Beck with Impact Sales Live. Sell better and impact the world. I'll talk to you soon.